Your 20s are about learning about yourself, making reckless decisions, going to college, getting an entry-level job, partying on weekends till you're blackout drunk, getting yourself into credit card debt and maybe even student loan debt, and absolutely obliterating your sleep schedule. And oftentimes, sort of like a canon event, either you or one of your friends will get into a relationship with someone they really never should have gotten into a relationship with, never should have dated to begin with, whether it was red flags from the beginning or red flags along the way of the relationship as it ran its course. One of these canon events is dating someone who's older than you. Now, age gap relationships are nothing new, but there is a deeper conversation to discuss when it comes to those. When someone in their 30s is dating someone in their 40s, that's a lot more palatable. You're both adults. You both have gone through life. Maybe you've gone through college, a couple different jobs. Maybe you own a house. You own a couple assets. So it's more of an even playing field. But comparing that to someone who's in their early 20s, closer to being 18 and a teenager, when they start dating someone in their mid-30s to mid-40s even, you're at a totally different stage of life, and the playing field is a little more uneven. Most of the time, your early 20s, you're in college. That's when they say your full frontal cortex develops and you start seeing things differently. In the United States, until you're 21, you can't even legally buy alcohol, buy cigarettes. Heck, you can't even rent a car in the United States till you are 21 to about 25. You're just a baby adult. So what happens when that decision goes horribly wrong? Hey, I'm Serenity, and we're joined by a couple of the dogs here. They're all asleep. Welcome to my first year doing Holiday Hometown Horror Week, which is the week between Christmas and New Year's, starting on Boxing Day, December 26th, all the way through December 30th. I'm going to be posting one true crime video to get us through this slumpish week. So today's case, it's hard. We're going to be discussing the tragic case of Ingrid Escamilla Vargas, who tragically was murdered by her partner. This case caused national outrage in Mexico and really set a precedent of change. In fact, this is possibly one of the main reasons why the current Mexican president is the Mexican president, because of what happened in this case, according to netizens. So before we begin, I want to give a couple trigger warnings for the following: gun violence, murder, dismembering of body parts, physical violence, rape, gender-based violence, femicide, mutation, torture, publicly displayed of deceased bodies, homophobia, stabbing, and pretty much every violent warning I can give. We're going to be discussing it today. This case gets pretty horrific. So if you can't stomach any of the above, please stop watching, put yourself first, and I'll see you at a later date with a different video. If I get any information wrong, please kindly let me know down below. This case was in Spanish, so I did have to translate it, and sometimes things get lost in translation. I try to get the information as accurate as possible. Sometimes things get lost in translation. One source says something, I can't verify it using another source, so I either go with the most commonly reported detail of that case or leave that detail out completely. As always, sources are going to be linked down below for you to go through yourself. Lastly, this video is an informational research study that I'm sharing for academic entertainment reasons only. I mean absolutely no harm, especially the victim and the victim's family. So grab a comfy blanket, grab a snack, grab a drink. I have raspberry rose poppy in here that I am drinking. Put on your coziest wintertime pajamas like me, and let's begin. Ingrid Escamilla Vargas was born in 1995 in Nueva Nacavar, Canatias, Puebla, Mexico. It's a poor town financially in the center of the state of Puebla. She was actually one of 5 daughters, and one of her sisters was actually a twin, so she had a twin sister. In a social media post, she proclaimed her huge love for animals and the book and movie series Harry Potter. Those were her 2 favorite things. She was actually a local beauty queen in her hometown, participating in local pageants all throughout her upbringing. In 2017, multiple social media posts showed that Ingrid was volunteering in Jarluta de Juarez, Mexico, which had just been hit by an earthquake, leaving tragic despair behind. So Ingrid had traveled to the city to help with reconstruction work, and she actually urged her followers and mutual friends on social media to help rebuild Mexico with any efforts that they possibly could. Ingrid was very well educated. She actually earned her master's degree in tourism business administration before she was even 25 years old. So she actually moved to Mexico's capital city for work, a trend many young professionals in Mexico were doing after graduation, to find well-paying jobs and to use their degree. Now, to understand this case and the absolute gravity about it, I need you to understand an issue. Mexico has a very harsh reality harsh truth about their issue with femicide. I'm about to dump so much information on you, so I need you to stay with me, but it's very important. Now, every country has an issue with gender-related violence, especially gender-related homicide, but Mexico is actually the country that coins the criteria that most other countries around the world have developed their own criteria based off of Mexico's. So femicide is defined as the criminal deprivation of the life of a female victim for reasons based on gender. The murder of a woman or a girl is classified as femicide based on when one of at least 7 of the following criteria are met. These criteria are evidence of violence, of sexual violence prior to the victim's death, a sentimental, affective, or trusting relationship with the perpetrator, the victim's body being displayed out in the public, or dismemberment. In 2012, the Mexican Penal Code first included femicide in their law, incorporating it into official crime statistics as a distinct category in that very same year. It was a relatively new category of crime to record, so identifying femicides has not been uniformly classified as different as such as femicide by different law enforcement institutions since the category was introduced, because it was kind of difficult for this new criteria to come to them and then for them to distinguish between. Due to this, it's difficult to calculate these homicides using all different criteria. One thing is unanimous. Femicides that are recorded and are classified as femicide go up every single year and increase in hand with family violence and sexual assault cases in Mexico. In the past 8 years since the criteria was introduced, when this study came out about this information. In the 1990s, when it was the height of gang violence in Mexico, they became the international reference point for gender-based violence, following the murder of more than 370 women and girls in Ciudad Juarez, which is a bordering city to Texas. In 2007, the Alert Mechanism for Gender Violence Against Women, or the AVGM, was created. The AVGM allows citizens to request the declaration of a gender alert, kind of like an Amber Alert, basically, in municipalities where violence against women is increasing, and it obliges local authorities to examine the situation and implement measures to end the increase in gender-based violence. As of October 2021, the AVGM have been declared in 22 of Mexico's 32 states. The growing prevalence of gender-based violence in Mexico has been in correlation and accompanied by deteriorating perceptions of security. According to the Gallup World Poll, women in Mexico are more likely to say that they don't feel safe walking alone at night, while the perceptions of safety and security for both men and women have deteriorated in numbers since 2007. The divergence between men and women has become increasingly stark. In 2007, 46% of women reported feeling unsafe walking alone, compared to their peers, 37% of men saying they feel unsafe walking alone at night. By 2019, this gap had widened significantly, with 67% of women stating that they feel unsafe compared to 48% of men. Both did go up, but women went up at a higher rate. This growing disparity between female and male perceptions of safety follows a deterioration in the rate of femicide, family violence, and sexual assault since 2015. Although guns are the primary cause of homicide in both male and females in Mexico, the past 7 years since this data was collected, the cause of death in femicides are usually due to strangulation, drowning, and suffocation, how women are murdered. Knives are actually used 23% of the time during femicides, and firearms are used 21% of the time in femicides. Now, Mexico kind of has this reputation of being known for organized crime, but it also has a very low statistical relationship data between femicide and organized crime, and femicides and gun violence. Homicide is a very big issue in Mexico, just like it is in most countries. In the United States, we have a very big issue with homicide and gender-based violence and gender-based crime. So I'm not trying to single out Mexico by stating that. Every country has this issue. This is just the statistics for Mexico. So homicide is a huge issue in Mexico for both men and women who die from it, but it's more likely that men are killed due to gang violence, and cartels. Women are more likely to die based on domestic and gender-based violence. Again, I want to state that I am not saying that men do not die by homicide, because they very much do. They just die at a rate that's lower than women do for the reason, if that makes sense. I'm also not saying that women don't die by cartel violence. They absolutely do, but it's rather broadly more common that they die by gender-based violence. In plain words, because they are women, just because of that, they are more likely to be murdered, compared to if they were involved in a gang lifestyle, that it would be the reason why they were murdered. That is just the statistics. Now, when it comes to the ages of the homicide victims, in the 3 categories, female victims tend to be minors under the age of 18, at 11.6% being the statistic of all homicide victims, compared to men who die under the age of 18 who are minors, that is 3.6%. In recent years, the uptick of minors as well as young adults becoming the victims of homicide are so significant that it's become the leading cause of death in Mexico for males and females between the ages of 15 to 35. Current data on femicides reveals a distinct type of violence that's not overall explained by the overall increase in organized crime activity or gun violence in the recent years. So it can't be that there is more guns or organized crime that's happening, so that's everyone's being affected at the same rate. That's not trending correctly. Overall, in 2021, murders fell by 3.6% compared to the previous year, while femicides actually increased by 2.7% according to government data. We can actually attribute that to COVID. On any given day, at least 10 women die by femicide in Mexico. So now that we know all the statistics, let's get into what could be the root problem. A study from the UCLA Chicano Studies provided the following information for us to review. In the 10 years between 1993 to 2003, over 320 women have been kidnapped, murdered, and dismembered in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. Again, it is a border town next to Texas. It's an interesting statistics because Juarez is considered one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and across the border, its sister city is El Paso, Texas, which is considered, up until a couple years ago, where gun violence happened, by an outsider, El Paso has been considered one of the safest cities in America on a large scale. And constantly, the border sees millions of people cross over every year. So it's an interesting statistic to look through that snapshot to understand how this is happening. These bodies were found strangled, mutilated, dismembered, raped, stabbed, and tortured. Some of the bodies had been so badly beaten that they could not identify who the victim was. 98% of those crimes have been identified by Mexico's definition of rape, which is penis penetration. In those 10 years, some of the suspects were actually jailed, but the femicides continued on without being stopped or the perpetrator being caught, to the point that copycat killings actually began to be seen as a trend in other border cities, including Nogales, Matamoros, Mexicali, Nuevo Laredo, and also in Chihuahua City. Now, most of the victims were actually young, poor people who came from very small villages. But what's worse is the statistic that we know that colorism came into play as a big part in the murders. The girls who were murdered were physically short in height, slim, have dark hair, and a darker skin tone, with the average age being 15 to 18 years old. But there also are outliers of girls being found as young as 6 years old and women being found in their 60s to 70s. Of these victims that were identified, over half of these were employed at a maquiladora or were seeking a job at one. And a maquiladora is a factory in Mexico run by a foreign. Think Coke, think Pepsi, think big brands. Right? And it's exporting its products to the country of that company. So if it's Coke, they're exporting the Coca-Cola to the United States, and then from there, they'll distribute them, if that makes sense. From these women who were Maquiladora employees, 1/6 of them were students. And this is pretty interesting. I get into this in a different video that's kind of old. I will link it below, of the women of Juarez, where I discuss femicides more specifically. And it's interesting because femicides in this case with the Maquiladora tie-in, it seems that the men who kill them are jealous of them for having a well-paying job. It's a kind of job that, even though it's very hard labor, it's a job that you can help get your family out of like poverty in a sense. So it's a very good job to have, but men were jealous of these women having these jobs so they would end their life in tandem. Mexico as a country has the second highest rate of femicides within Latin America. The top states with the most prevalent crimes are Veracruz, the state of Mexico itself, Nuevo León, Puebla, and Mexico City. On average, only 3% of these crimes are investigated and only 1% of perpetrators are convicted or sentenced to any jail time. So let's get back to Ingrid, now that you know the statistics. Ingrid lived in Vigelo, which is a neighborhood of Gustavo A. Madero, which is in north of Mexico City, where she resided with her boyfriend of 5 years, Erik Francisco Robledo Rosas, a 46-year-old man who worked as a civil engineer. Now, Erik was actually about 21 years older than Ingrid, and he was a divorced man whose ex-wife had filed previously complaints against him for alleged domestic violence in the 8 years they were together before he got with Ingrid. Now, over one weekend in February of 2020, something truly dark would conspire within the pair's apartment. On February 8th, in the evening, an argument broke out between the couple where Ingrid was questioning Erik if he was actually intoxicated. The line of questioning about his intoxication level infuriated him, leading to a fight between the pair, not just an argument. Erik had gotten some scratches from Ingrid on his body. Some reports state that Ingrid started by actually stabbed Erik 3 times, and in retaliation, he turned back to grab a kitchen knife and he stabbed Ingrid multiple times in the neck. The wounds were so severe that her life would be ended right there. Instead of calling the police right then and there and confessing to murder of his partner, Erik decided it would be best if he cleaned up the crime scene and to hide the body. In a severely twisted idea, Erik decided he should skin Ingrid's body and take out all the organs from within her body to attempt to flush them down the couple's apartment toilet in the bathroom. Now, the question is, how does someone go from one argument, then to murder, then to dismembering and attempting to hide a body? Quickly, Erik realized he was not succeeding in this twisted idea of a cover-up in his house, so he wrapped the remains in a green plastic bag, likely a trash bag, leaving his home to discard the bag on just the side of the road where cars drive by. While Erik was attempting to dispose of his crime and any evidence, apparently there was one more person in the house, his autistic son, who had witnessed the whole murder. A young child had witnessed the whole ordeal of such a heinous crime and was away from his mother. Erik then decided to call his ex-wife, the child's mother, to confess that he had killed his girlfriend. He had no intentions of ever calling the police, actually. In fact, his ex-wife would be the one to get off that phone call and call the police herself, reporting what she had heard over the phone on that phone call, especially because her child was in the apartment when it happened, made the situation even more heinous to her. Police immediately rushed over to the residence where Erik would be found and arrested and consigned to the police ministry, the police officers. Now, we're going to discuss his arrest a little bit later on, but at the time of his arrest, a Mexican tabloid published a couple photos in their newspaper of a bloodied Erik, shirtless, and his hands were cuffed behind him. The headline stating, "It's Cupid's fault," referencing the upcoming holiday of Valentine's Day and alluding to this being a lover's spat that just ended in death. Not the murder of a very young woman by her very much older boyfriend, and the fact that his child was witnessing the whole thing, and he was autistic, and he was away from his mother. None of that was written. It was just a lover's spat. Mexico's Museum of Memory and Tolerance posted on Twitter in reference to the publications of the gruesome image, stating they made her a victim anew and gave justification to the aggressor. The victims of macho violence need justice and the ethical response from the media and society in these cases. And I quote, referencing Mexico's toxic machismo culture of men trying to be macho while harming women. It's like this tough guy persona, and it's very toxic. I've discussed this in a previous video. Let's discuss the photos that were circulating on the internet that would spark a huge protest later on. But for now, just know that along with the photos of Erik that I am going to put on screen, but they are going to be severely blurred because we're talking about a lot of blood, videos began circulating on social media showing Erik in the back of a police car, bloody chest with his head wrapped in gauze, confessing to the crime in detail while talking to an officer as he was being recorded. In the clip, you can hear Erik state in Spanish, and I quote, "We started to argue and we fought over my alcohol consumption. She said she wanted to kill me and I said, do it. She took a knife and I said, do it at one. She stabbed me once and I said, do it stronger. And she did it. And she tried 2 more times. I then grabbed the knife from her and used it to stab her in the throat." Police asked him why did he dismember Ingrid, and he stated, and I quote, "I didn't want anyone to know. I used the same knife she attacked me with to stab her in her throat. I threw pieces of her dead body to the drainage system, but because I felt kind of ashamed." It's obvious, allegedly, in these videos that he has no remorse. It was a kitchen knife that caused all that damage. A kitchen knife that probably in years past they've used to cook dinner. But also, furthermore, it was that same kitchen knife that was used to dismember and skin and take the organs out of Ingrid's body, something we have in all of our kitchens, a simple kitchen knife. When officers entered the Gustavo, Mexico City complex, they found a bloody knife that was used in the murder after the argument broke out between the couple, with pools of blood apparent in the apartment. They were also able to locate a green bag with a couple of Ingrid's parts just a couple of blocks away from the apartment. Now, it was reported that Erik's ex-wife was the one to call the police and report the murder. Some neighbors also called the local safety secretary, the SSC, when they noticed a blood-soaked man walking around the streets, exiting his building. Now, while authorities were investigating the case, they're also trying to locate Ingrid's family to notify them of her death. And they lived in a different city, remember? On February 10th, the remains of her body were handed over to her family, and she was buried the following day, on February 11th. She would be laid to rest in a local cemetery in her hometown, in the municipal of Juan Galindo, where Ingrid was raised. Before she was laid in her final resting place, Ingrid was given a lying-in state in the municipal principality of Juan Galindo. A lying-in state happened when a past official, president, or person of public standing is placed in the state building inside of their coffin to allow members of the public to pay their respects and well wishes to the deceased. Around 300 people came to pay their respects to Ingrid and their outrage for Ingrid's femicide. During her final burial and funeral in Nuevo Naca, Puebla, Mexico, Vale Jarillo, a high school friend of Ingrid's, actually spoke to the press that she was absolutely shocked about her friend's death because she was always on great terms with everyone she knew. And I quote, "She was a lover of life, a protector of animals. I can't really say anything bad about her. She was a very calm person, always smiling, super kind. When you needed her, she was there for you. I've got a lot of things in my head, a lot of questions about why he did it. It's news that really hits you. No one has the right to take someone's life." End quote. On February 12th, a Mexico City's judge found the elements of the case against Erik in the investigation provided by the Attorney General of Mexico City, claiming he had been imprisoned preemptively, basically, that there was not enough evidence. During his preliminary hearing, Erik announced he would end his own life in prison if he would be put in a normal jail due to mental illness that caused him to do this crime. So he was actually court-ordered to carry out a psychological evaluation in Mexico City at the Men's Center for Psychiatrical Rehabilitation of the Southern Preventive Prison for Men in Mexico City. At the same time, a judge set a 3-month deadline for investigators to complete their investigation in order to maintain that they had a case against Erik. During a press conference, the Deputy Attorney General for Victims Assistance and Community Services of the Fiscal General de Justicia, which means the Attorney Generals basically, Nelly Montague Diaz, told the press that the 6 Attorney Generals and the SSC officers responding to the crime scene possibly misused the crime scene footage that they obtained at the time, and they were personally being investigated for leaks. After all, the question on everyone's mind was, how did the photos of Erik bloodied and in the back of a police car on his way to the police station end up on the internet not even a few hours after his arrest? And furthermore, photos of Ingrid's dismembered body were also floating around on the internet. Someone had taken them and leaked them. Deputy Attorney General Diaz said, and I quote, "The Attorney General's office has continued the corresponding investigation and will follow up until the appropriate administration sanctions are issued for those individuals and authors involved in the leak of these images." The initial news of Ingrid Escamilla's death came just one day after Mexico's president of the time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, stated to the press on his personal issue that the issue of femicides, and I quote, had been manipulated by the media to be used as a weapon of his administration, stating basically it's not as big as an issue as the media is claiming it is. While answering questions from the press about the plans of the Prosecutor Attorney General, Alejandro Guedes, to change femicides that are classified, at the same time, social media was up in rage as many Mexican netizens expressed their anger over the fact that photos of Ingrid's dismembered body had been posted on the internet and asked for whoever published those photos to be prosecuted by the law to the fullest extent. Now, the left-wing mayor of Mexico City at the time, Claudia Sheinbaum, the city where Ingrid sadly lost her life, said she would make prosecutors ask for maximum sentence for Ingrid's killer. It is also worth noting that at this time, Claudia was Mexico City's mayor, but she's now the country's president today. She's actually the first woman president of Mexico. And some people online state that this moment in time and her rooted stance of prosecuting people who basically re-victimize Ingrid in her death on this case is the reason why she won the presidency. Like, this rooted into netizens and the country's mind that this is the person we want to be our president, basically. A local member of the local feminist activist collective in Mexico called Femnasty, Xochitl Rodriguez, voiced her opinion online in response to the president at the time, whose whole running campaign was based on transformative action, ready to defend marginalized populations, and I quote, "He was supposed to represent a change, and it turns out that he is not. In fact, that you wake up in the morning and your president cannot reassure you on what specific actions he's taking to deal with the issue is outrageous. Keep in mind, this case is happening and unfolding in the public in 2020, in February, a month before the pandemic happens. And recent data from 2019 released by the Mexican government recorded that 1,006 femicides incidents occurred, with 10% increase from 2018 at that time. So this was the most recent data at the time of Ingrid's death. The overall women's violent deaths increased by 10 killings per day in 2019, up from the 7 in 2017, according to data published by Mexico's Office of UN Women. The executive director for Intersecta, a Mexican city-based group that promotes gender equality, Estefana Vela, stated, and I quote, "These are not only hashtags, these are students protesting at universities and mothers demanding justice for their daughters and change." Now, at that same time, there was another case that began garnering online outrage, pouring onto the internet, and it was from another very horrible case of femicide that occurred. And both Ingrid and this young girl's death are the main reasons why the protests we're going to get to would begin. It is worth noting that these two stories are often reported together, but I do believe it is important that each of these stories be told separately because they are two separate people and they were not related in any sense. So later down the line, I will cover the case I'm about to talk about in a separate video.
Fatima Cecilia Aldrete
was a 7-year-old little girl abducted from school, and police would find her body wrapped in a plastic bag. The outcry from both girls' deaths would unite the whole country to address their faults when it comes to gender-based violence against women and girls. However, while everyday citizens were unpacking their country's inner misogyny and violence against women, the president, Mr. López Obrador, seemed to not know how to address the nation at all regarding the two girls' deaths. The conversation we spoke about earlier only gets worse because the journalist who was questioning him about femicide stated that he actually bristled with his response and tried to bring the conversation to back what he was trying to discuss in the press conference, that the government had recently located more than $100 million in criminal assets and would be funneling that money back into poor communities in the country. And I quote, "Look, I don't want the topic to only be femicide today. This issue has been manipulated by a lot of the media." And that following Monday, when another journalist would ask about Fatima's death, the little girl's death, he would blame femicide for the cause, but he would actually never address what he would be doing to combat the epidemic, basically thoughts and prayers. However, those statistics of femicide we spoke about earlier, women's rights groups claim that that number is dramatically underreported, with very few murders actually being classified as femicides. The country's National Institute of Women made a statement to local media on the issue, and I quote, "Mexico faces a major challenge in terms of violence against women. Fell into a decline. It was a process of progressive degradation that had to do with the neoliberal model. The distribution of images of criminal acts as a form of advocating crime involving sensationalism, viciousness, mockery, and morbidity causes re-victimization, vandalizes violence, and threatens the digital dignity, privacy, and identity of victims and their families." While the violence was actually escalating due to what some have claimed the lack of what the government is considering an effective response, many protesters became violent. They turned to smashing police cars and police station windows and graffitiing national monuments. Now, the discussion of how Ingrid's photos of her body ended up in the tabloids escalated further when on February 10th of 2020, Pelsa and La Resna both published details account of the murder, including graphic crime scene photos that I mentioned earlier taken by first responders. And they published this just 2 days after her death and as she was being laid to rest. Those photos were actually posted on Twitter and Facebook specifically. So this, combined with the president's response to the murders and netizens demanding consequences to those who leaked the gruesome images, triggered debates on the role of big media playing in these cases and normalizing violence against women by showing you physical pictures of them, cultural norms, and how society is structured as reasons why femicides are so prevalent. The conversation also questioned why and how femicides are classified as such, and what qualifies a death to be classified as a femicide. The Mexico City prosecutor, Anista Godet Ramo, described the photo leak not only as offensive to the victim and her family, but also to society, which did not consent to ever seeing those photos. At the time, she also announced a proposal for a certain law that would punish anyone who had hand in distributing the crime scene images by public officials in the court of law. So basically, if you were a first responder and you published crime scene images, you'd be prosecuted. The leak of Ingrid's crime scene photos were not the first time a leak of crime scene photos would happen. Prior to the case, the Human Rights Commission of Mexico City, in a different case, encouraged authorities to respond to people who leaked images of victims in the homicide case that occurred in Colonia Navate. The push was supported by the Undersecretary of Human Rights of Mexico City, the capital of the administration. On February 12, 2020, social media users, specifically on Facebook and Twitter, who had seen the crime scene photos began to post new photos unrelated to the crime. Their goal was to hide the images of the horror on the internet to honor the victims instead. Photos included Ingrid's selfies, but also photos of sunsets and starlit skies and positive things, sometimes even quotes. The photos of people see of Ingrid should not have been of her dismembered body, but of her smiling, full of joy. That should have been the memory people had of her, they claimed, as their mission to do so. The National Commission to Prevent and Eradicate Violence Against Women and the Institute for Women in Meros both condemned the publication of the images, stating that the published photos of the victim dismembered body re-victimized Ingrid all over again. On February 14th of 2020, Valentine's Day, the newspaper La Prensa published a front page letter responding to the criticism of their previous publication. The tabloid's director, Luis Carlies, claimed that they had followed the protocol about how to treat femicides. The lower house of Mexican Congress lawmakers approved reform to the penal code that would increase the maximum prison sentence of femicide. Previous, it had been only 60 years, so they increased the life sentence to 65 years instead of 60 years. Is that long enough? You decide. Next, the Senate would have to vote on it. However, from research, it doesn't seem like it was actually passed, so it's still 60 years, from what I can tell. The same week, the coalition of representatives from multiple of the 6 political parties in Mexico issued a declaration to condemn gender-based violence and demanded all levels of government strengthen the laws to fight against it. All of this was happening very quickly in succession and simultaneously the few weeks after Ingrid's death. A representative of the Morena party, the current president's political party at the time, Ana Patricia Parlita, gave a speech on the issue, and I quote, "This is a national crisis. What else needs to happen for us to accept that violence against women in our country is an epidemic that has extended to all social strata." A National Action Political Party Senator, Josefina Vargas Mota, filed a Senate proposal to create a separate special commission that would specifically monitor the prosecution of femicides against minors, and marches from feminist groups and those outraged by Ingrid and Fatima's deaths took place on Friday and also on Saturday. Beatrice Belmont, a student studying economics and international relations at ITAM, a Mexico City University, and a member of the Fourth Wave, a feminist collective, told press about the destructive protest methods, and I quote, "If trashing monuments makes authorities look at us and listen to our demands, then we will continue to do so," while criticizing the president's response to the crimes as unacceptable and unfitting for someone who should be acting as a national leader. It seems that he's closing his eyes before a reality that is not only sitting in front of him, but also slapping him in the face. Mr. Lopez did respond to press drawing parallels between the protesters and the Mexican Revolution, stating, "This is why the participation of citizens is important. If there hadn't been a revolution, we wouldn't have the 1917 Constitution." President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador told reporters that he supported women's desire to seek greater justice for gender-related crimes, and he spoke to press stating, and I quote, "We celebrate that women defend their right to security. I pronounce myself in favor of women and against femicide," while condemning the leaked crime scene photos and announced he would find out who leaked them. Political science professor Alejandro Hope wrote down in a column called in the El Universal newspaper titled "Who Killed Ingrid Escamilla?", where they wrote, and I quote, "A violent and machismo culture killed Ingrid. Our indifference killed her. Our failure to demand that things change killed her," while citing in the article that only 1 in 10 femicide cases in Mexico receive a guilty verdict that are tried. Alejandro called into question how a system that is in place that allows all these horrendous crimes to continue to take place against women can continue to prosper and the development of the country. Mayor of Mexico City at the time, Claudia Sheinbaum, tweeted, and I quote, "It is quite appalling when hatred reaches the extremes in the case of Ingrid Escamilla." Now, controversy continued to grow as more details of Ingrid's death and life continued to be released. Her life story was one of a very well-educated woman who who moved across the country into the capital for work, leaving behind her mountain town to help her family back in her hometown financially and to better their lives, to try to make a name for herself. She was just one of millions of young Mexican women doing the exact same thing. One of the protests was actually in front of the Mexican capital, Bellas Artes, a premier cultural venue. Specifically, women police officers were sent to keep this protest in order, specifically women, which was a choice. While protesters shouted, and I quote, "It is absolutely appalling when hatred reaches the extremes, as in the case of Ingrid Escamilla." A few of those gathering actually spoke to local news stations who were reporting on the protests about why they're at the protests. 21-year-old law student Laura Torres Diaz said, and I quote, "We demand an end to femicide and that violence against women is stopped. They are killing us. They are raping us. They disappear us, and no one does anything. Enough already." 19-year-old psychology student Clara Soto stated, and I quote, "We are all Ingrid. We are all victims of violence. They kill us with total impunity, and the authorities laugh at our protests. The president jokes about our pain." Protest marches broke off at the La Presa building, one of the newspapers that actually published photos of Ingrid's body, and police met the women in riot gear as one of the newspaper trucks actually caught flame. Social media again was also flooded with the hashtag Justice for Ingrid. One tweet stating, and I quote, "The world needs to know and remember her beautiful life." On February 16, 2020, an organized march in the outskirts of Ingrid's home in Mexico City were held as protesters were seeking justice in her case, and feminist groups offered memorial items for her at a memorial shrine in front of her building. It was there where her family members asked the media for their loved ones to be given dignified and respectful treatment. Ingrid's aunt, Victoria Barrios, told People, and I quote, "Every time they're going to publish a photo, they're going to write a line. Think about it a bit. Make it a clean communication, one that is not yellow." Civil society organizers, activists, and researchers penned an open letter to the media against female violence, stating, and I quote, "We express our total rejection of the expedition of bodies of victims in social media and online networks. In no case is it justifiable. The act of these newspapers in making photos and videos go viral is irresponsible, inhuman, and re-victimizes Ingrid and her family in addition to perpetrating violence against women." Article 19, a human rights organization, condemned the crime scene photo leaks, stating, and I quote, "Since they contravene the protocols of action in the investigation of femicides and international human rights standards, therefore these actions by FGJCDMX personnel are a violation of human rights of victims and women." The Arquidiócesis of Mexico demanded that the Mexican authorities did not let the perpetrator off without punishment, something that could possibly happen. But that was it. The world went into the pandemic, and then nothing was heard until September 5th of 2022. Ingrid's family and friends, along with the women's rights organization, who had asked the other collective, who actually created a small protest, to protest the maximum sentence of 70 years of Erik during his sentencing hearing. However, the sentencing hearing was actually postponed until October 12th in 2022 due to some technical incidents. There is still no sentencing in this case, but some news did come out in March of 2022 prior, where Mexico's lower house passed a reform bill to the penal code called the Ingrid Law, which sanctions the public servants to a 10-year prison sentence for the improper distribution of photos and images of victims, especially women. So there is still no concrete justice in this case. Erik has not been given a sentence. It's been postponed, but that is all the information I have on this case at this time. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. This case really is one that, in a sense, has kicked off national change in Mexico when it comes to femicide, especially gender-based violence against women. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on it to see what happens if Erik ever gets sentenced. Hopefully he gets sentenced, and hopefully it's at least the maximum, maybe more. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. All my social media are linked down below. Follow me if you want. We have 4 more Holiday Hometown Horror Weeks episodes to get through, so I will see you then. Love you, minute kisses, don't do anything stupid, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!